Welcome back to Quintessence Virtual Retreat, Embrace Healing. I'm so pleased to be joined here today with Aarona Lea. She is the author, creator, and of the Moon Deck, and she works with like intuitive emotional healing, and also teaches around the Moon Deck. And I'm just so thankful that you're joining us in this discussion today around how healing can really change and uplift our lives. And I'd love to start with just taking a couple breaths together and really fully arriving here in this space. The breathing feels so good sometimes. Okay, so I would just like to invite everyone to take a moment and really think about an intention that they'd like to hold during this session to make sure that they are like you're receiving what you'd like to out of this session. And also I want to thank everyone for just taking this time that you have, this precious time in your life, to focus on your healing work, because we know when we do our healing work, it has a ripple effect out into our lives, our families, our community, and the world. And so with that, Aarona, would you share with us just a little bit about your work?
Yes, thank you, by the way, for having me here and inviting me to be a part of this forum. It's a weird time we're in, and I feel like it's just wonderful that we have these tools to connect. And so thank you for everyone that's here. And my work has really evolved a lot over the years. I've been in this field in various ways for about 25 years, and I really feel like I've been in this work since I was a child, just sort of my inherent interest in things, my inherent seeking of healing and understanding to make sense of things and of life. And then really when I was 19, I discovered yoga. My brother introduced it to me at the time, and that was really a huge turning point for me as far as just getting into my body and finding some sense of home in that, which was hard for me a lot of the years. And really, I guess, feeling empowered to change the chemistry of my mind, make choices in a different way. And so that started, I practiced for about 10 years before I started teaching. And so that's been like a thread. I've taught for 15 years of yoga. I was doing holistic health counseling before that. I was a photographer, mixed media arts, and poetry before that. So I feel like I'm in this place now where it's kind of culminating and coming together, and working in the arts, embodiment, health, holistic health. And in retrospect, I think a lot of that was me seeking healing for myself, seeking an answer for myself that drew me to these things. So that's all been a big part of my work, and I can get more as we discuss it, like what the traumas were that I healed through and kind of how they manifested for me. And so then now I actually let go of teaching straight up yoga classes about a year ago. For now, I think embodiment will come through in a different way. And just because I'm super focused on the Moon Deck. And so I created the Moon Deck we've been in business 4.5 years. It took 2 years to make it. So really 6.5 years. And then even before that, it was a vision I had carried with me since 2010. And I know this because I found a journal entry when I was doing the writing for the book. It was partly like just hundreds of old journals, some channeling, some research online when I felt stuck. I've been a student for a long time, so knowledge I absorbed from my teachers. So I found a journal entry in 2010 that basically said, I want to do a deck. This is potentially the artist, who is Andy Kay, who ended up being the illustrator. But it wasn't until 2014 that I approached her and invited her into it. And it wasn't quite the Moon Deck then. It wasn't so ritual based. I just knew I wanted to do a deck. I was more active on Twitter at the time. I had an old intern kind of collect all my little one-liners and decks have always been so healing for me, from like the witchy tarot side of things to the more kind of Louise Hay's affirmation decks to the Osho Zen deck, kind of all of them. And they really helped
Yeah.
me. They really helped me pause. They probably entertained me in the moment of tension. They connected me to me, like the answers I had inside, my spirit guides. They just kind of gave me new perspective. I'm also very visual and tactile, so it gave me something in that way to work with. And then in my yoga classes, I used to do these big classes with live music, musicians in the room. I have a strong community in New York where I lived for 18 years, which is really where the bubble of my teaching career happened, aside from the travels. And that's when I started to like paint words on paper and hand it to my students, or I'd buy decks and hand them cards. And just kind of investing in all these favorite decks. I was like, I want to get my own deck one day. So that's kind of where the seed of that was, how they helped me and how they wove into kind of this multidisciplinary experience in a yoga class, and seeing how they affected students. Like a year later or a month later, they'd be like, this card changed my life. You have no idea. It was the perfect message and the perfect time. So when I approached Andy, I had been sitting in a new moon circle for a couple years with about like 13 women in New York. And that started to like really solidify into a clear experience, and was a big thing for me, both because of community and sisterhood, but also the way that we started to formulate it, which is all written in the back of the deck, the guidebook. We switched it out a little bit because the little book, there's only so much space in there. So that started to shape this idea of working more closely with ritual, of honoring the cycles of life, the cycles of womanhood, the cycles of the moon. The moon is something I've always connected with. In fact, my mom, she passed away a few years ago, but she told me when she was thinking about my name, she was standing in her final month on a balcony at a party or something, rubbing her belly, looking at the moon, trying to decide my name. And this woman came out and they started to have a conversation, and then they sort of figured out what my name would be. And yeah, the moon has just been a theme in my life. And so I think that circle connected with the vision I have been carrying, connected with my healing, through trauma over the years, and sort of being fascinated with health mixed in with my, like I'm sure like many of us, my fascination and interest in organic and living wellness, health, yoga was a sincere interest and became my career, but it was also muddled with this deep suffering and really looking for answers. So eventually, as some of the debris cleared, and I started to do it for work, that was also its own process. But the deck, I think, kind of was born from that, being a student, eventually becoming a teacher, bringing some of the older art kind of disciplinaries in, and then as the deck started to be, from the moon circle, the rituals, the power of container, the power of intention, emotional and mental health, trusting ourselves is like a huge one for me. So yeah, all of that combined, and then the actual creation of the deck just sort of became itself. Of course, there's a lot of things that unfolded as it started to get created and the team came together. And then we launched in 2014 through a pre-order, a kind of Indiegogo campaign, and we had a huge amount of support. It was a very successful campaign. And those funds basically started our company, and we've been slowly and steadily growing ever since. And my teaching has evolved into the work of the Moon Deck and kind of all the things I spoke about. So that's kind of where I am now.
I love that. I mean, I think cards in that way are so powerful, like you're saying. I always have a couple decks of different kinds around, and I love just like when you're like, because for me, I often feel like I need some kind of focus for my day. There's so many things to focus on, and so I do find sometimes just like pulling a card, it's like, oh, okay, cool, I'm just gonna focus on this today, so that you have that something to come back to.
Yeah.
And I also love this idea of like the ritual part of cards. And I'm just thinking of a time with my friend where we had this massive hydrangea bush in our yard, and we picked a bunch of hydrangea blossoms and went up into the Redwood National Forest and like made this beautiful area with the hydrangea blossoms and like sat and like did cards together. And I love how what you're saying, like that sisterly, there's something about the oracle, like doing an oracle and with someone and like burning incense, you know, and that feeling, you know, especially if it's like real, you know, like frankincense or like real, you know, not the 20 cents we used to get when we were little. That's like ocean breeze or whatever, but
Yeah.
you know, like some powerful sage or copal and like inviting in those energies and that wisdom is so healing, right? Like, and I'm wondering, like, could you share with us a little bit about like what your understanding of healing is?
Yeah. I think to me it's pretty multi-layered and very personal. You know, I think it's a very intimate, personal thing for everyone, but of course there's common threads we'll all agree on. And to me, I think healing is first, it's like recognition that we're in pain, awareness that we're suffering, awareness that we're hurt, angry, whatever the thing is. I think is a really important first step, because healing is definitely not sweeping it under the rug. I know some people live that way. It's not my way. I'm a deep and big feeler, so I didn't really have a choice in the matter, but I've experienced that being too much for people, or people who want to just sweep it under the rug. And I'm like, that doesn't work. Like, it will bubble back up, whether that's the next time there's conflict and it informs that conflict, or like whatever it is. I don't want to hold that. So yeah, I think healing is that recognition and that acknowledgement. I think that it's giving ourselves permission to feel it all, to feel the full range, which can be scary. And sometimes we're going to need therapy in that, or counsel, or a circle, or a healer, or sometimes we're going to need support in that, because sometimes as the blind spots reveal themselves, like, it can be overwhelming depending on what one has gone through. So seeking external support is healing to me. Also knowing when it's time to go in. So it's not too much of the isolated inward, but it's not too much of the constant outward processing. Like, sometimes we need that. I'm a processor verbally, so I definitely need that. But I also have to get real with myself when, if I'm having a hard time sitting still with myself, talking it out more isn't really, for me, the solution in that moment. Then I have to learn to be still and look at, why am I so uncomfortable in that stillness? So I think it's a bit of a dance of the internal, external, you know, giving yourself permission to honestly feel what's there, even if it's not pretty, getting support in that process if that's what we need. So it's like a really, really getting honest with ourselves, I think is healing. And then, you know, the tricky thing sometimes is once we get really honest, or once a big enough situation in our life happens that just like blows our like head off, you know, then you might start to see it everywhere. It's always been there, but now you're seeing your shit everywhere. And so then that can be a whole thing too. So I think healing is a journey. It's not on anyone else's schedule but your own. So to be gentle with ourselves, it's definitely, in my experience, not linear. Like, we might move through like the heaviest of it, and then years later, like little pieces of it will come up. Or, you know, I've had some big things happen in my life. I went through a divorce. I was saying before we went into the recording of 3 years ago. My mom died at the same time. So a lot was excavated. And although I'm not longing for that relationship anymore necessarily, it kicked up such deep stuff that there's still layers that come up 3 years later that that was just the catalyst to deal with some much deeper dank in there that's like older, that like, you know, around self-worth, abandonment, like whatever the things are that was a catalyst for. So I don't have a single definition, but that's kind of, I feel like, in a nutshell. And forgiveness is such an important part of healing. Like, forgiveness and acceptance, I think, is definitely something that I've been navigating and am navigating, and in different scenarios in my life. And I think that's whether it's forgiveness and acceptance of ourself and where we messed up, or acceptance and forgiveness for how other people choose to live their lives and how that's impacted us. Like we're not going to heal if we're gripping onto the resentment and bitterness. We'll get
Yes.
perhaps a few steps ahead, but at some point that will block if we're not willing to do that. So that, I think, is a really big part of it as well.
Yes. And I love this idea of the dance and the interplay between the internal and the external. And it like immediately brought me again to the moon, of like how the moon goes very internal and dark and then and invisible almost. And then the moon is very bright and illuminating. And I think it's so brilliant. Like there are those times when you need to just curl up in your bed and like do some deep belly breathing, you know, and just breathe and just be with yourself fully and just nurture yourself and like surround yourself with this loving self-love presence of, and then there is a place where you're like, wait, I need a sounding board. Like I need someone else to hold this container for me so that I can release on a deeper level, or maybe they have some insight for me that is hard for me to see through my own lens of this situation. And so yeah, I think that it's really important to recognize both the internal and the external parts of healing. And I know you shared with us a little bit about, you know, this huge experience of like going through a divorce and having your mom leave the earth plane at the same time. And could you share with us maybe a little bit about, were there some tools or some things that you specifically kind of did that helped you, or perspectives that kind of helped you to keep, like one of the things I find with healing is that place where you feel into those deep, dark, dank emotions, but then like bringing them to the light, so to speak, if that makes sense. Yeah. Like through art, maybe, right? For me, art was a huge one for a long time, or journaling, or pulling a card even, right? Like I have these dank emotions. What do I do with them? Let's pull a card. What is some guidance? So that we're like, it's kind of like composting in a way, our emotions, you know, and then like you're like taking the compost, okay, compost is ready, let's put it on the flowers, you know, let's like, so I'm curious, yeah, if there are some, you know, some techniques or some tools that really helped you to move through this time.
Yeah. And to piggyback off the moon thing, like definitely, because the new moon is like the dark moon, and that's so much with the deck of like honoring those cycles and not judging ourselves like, oh, I'm not like out and bright and I'm just like more dark, and that there's an inherent wisdom and certain needs that we have in each of those cycles. I just wanted to like
no,
feel that and let people, and honoring those cycles, and like especially for women.
Yes, I was just going to say that, especially for women. And just to have this brief caveat, and then like I found so much too as being a wife and a mother, it's so external, and I'm such an introvert. And so allowing myself that time, even if that means like, yes, I have childcare and right now I'm not working, I'm actually going to take some time and nurture myself, you know, and allow myself to be deeply internal. And I think as women, I don't know, we're so generous with our energy all of the time, and that kind of becomes a cultural norm.
Yeah.
You know, and women are very community based. So then it can also be like, how social am I? Am I, you know, hanging out with friends or things like that? And we start to like you were saying with self-worth, we can kind of attach our self-worth to how much we're giving energy, and we need to also give energy to ourselves and reserve our energy, like that, you know, dark phase of the moon.
100%. Yeah. Yeah. Hopefully people have been able to do it during these times a little more. But as far as how I navigated that, I would say everything we're talking about, just being a part of that equation of how I healed and navigated through, what occurred a few years ago. I think I've meditated for a long time, but during that time, it became like a huge non-negotiable. Now it's kind of morphed and shifts a little bit here and there. I'm back in a good flow with it again, and I'll let it shift a little bit. Sitting at my altar, lighting a candle, whether that turns into meditation or chanting and then meditation, or meditation and then journaling and oracle cards, working with the moon deck, all of those things have helped me. And at that time it was like a non-negotiable, because my anxiety was like out the roof. I had to find
Yeah.
sitting down. Therapy at that time, I didn't do that right away, but when I came to LA a few months later, because I was in New York when all that happened, I did do that because I really needed that perspective at the time. I'll also like get an astrology reading at that time, go to my healers, like all the counsel comes in. And I did see a couple healers. So that's really been my technique is if I'm that crushed, I definitely need outside support. And healers, it'll be like 1 or 2 sessions, but something like a therapy kind of counsel that will be more regular at that time. And then meditation, like having a daily meditation practice, tons of writing and journaling. I do a thing called spirit writing, which is like just really having a prayer of intention and kind of like creating a sovereign space, and then going into like a full kind of download writing practice. That was big for me. Lots of crying and snot. And I remember viscerally, there was a time where I was like on my bed curled up. I had moved to LA at that point, and I was just like going through it crying. I was just like, still, like I kind of had a moment of judgment. And then this voice was just like, let it move through you. Because even if we're sobbing and having a moment, are we like this to it and kind of going through it, or can we just like let it move through ourselves and let it move through our spirit, so that we're like, oh, this is grief, this is sadness, and like really almost with a curious human nature, like letting it move through us so that it can live out its full cycle and have the cleanse that we need. It doesn't mean we won't have 10 more, but like letting that cycle cleanse out. And so there's this moment where I soften and be like, let me feel what this actually feels like without contracting to it, and just like go into this emotion like a color on a palette, and my older brother also, we're sort of cut from the same cloth, and we know each other very well, and had obviously grew up together, and I have a kind of lots of dynamics, big family with various parents and things like that. So he was also extremely supportive during that time. So that's that external support piece. So yeah, I think that was it. I did work with the moon deck a lot, and work really, my work probably similar to you is not this like 9 to 5 thing. It's like, it's deeply woven into my spirituality, my wellness, my art, my self-worth. Like it's, sometimes I need to pull myself away from it and let myself have more joy and play. And that's kind of part of my work now as well. But work was a savior in a lot of ways then too, because it was somehow like still doing great and growing through that. And it became an outlet where I could just like step out of me and my shit for a moment and just give to others. And that's why even teaching yoga has done that. Teaching for me does that, because like maybe I have to kind of work something out for 5 minutes internally, but then eventually, if I'm really going through something while teaching a group, but eventually it's just like, it's so healing for me to show up as a teacher and kind of like put my stuff aside and just be more open as a conduit for the work that I'm learning. And I share a lot of my life's teachings, but they need to, like some of those things, it was too raw to teach anything about. I didn't even have the words for it. So now it's getting into a place where it's incubated enough and processed enough, and there's still some final layers, but now it's turning into like, now I have the words for it. Now I can create with it. And that's what the moon deck is. The moon deck is, you know, a collection of healing journeys and the voice of who my younger self needed at the time. And there's so much healing in that deck, and there's so much heart, and so many women's voices were coming through as I wrote it. And so yeah, all of that really has helped me and reestablishing my place in the world in this new life, and, you know, grieving the life that I thought I was building, and connecting with my mom's spirit was really huge. She's very much with me and has come to me as a hummingbird in many ways. So releasing her ashes into sacred spots, kind of all of that really, like, you know, helps.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing about these transitions. I know that we're having a like public discourse about very private, personal things, and I want to thank you for sharing that, because I think when we share our stories, you know, we open up pathways for other people's healing, and sometimes we trigger places within other people where they're like, oh, wait, I did kind of brush that under the rug. And maybe that's why I'm having these things happen in my life, because my spirit is saying, hey, I need to heal from this experience. I need to, you know, the root of healing means to be whole. And so I think sometimes too, like, our spirit endures these situations so that we can reclaim parts of ourselves, so that we can become even more than we once were. I'm thinking about these little caterpillars that my daughter got to turn into butterflies, and like how they just turn into mush and they're chrysalis, right? And just allowing ourselves, like a container, like the chrysalis is like that container, to just allow everything to just fall apart and mush and be ugly, you know. And then out of that, you know, obviously we know comes this gorgeous butterfly, this gorgeous being that's ready to have a new experience in the world and be lighter. And so thank you for sharing this time of metamorphosis with us.
There's a butterfly card in the moon deck, and the mantra says, I honor the natural process of growth and transformation.
Yeah.
It's like, just, yeah, honoring that. And it's been, you know, and they're ongoing, you know, and it's just, I think we've all kind of have a certain design and how we feel things, and I do feel things deeply, and I dig and go in, and it's just getting to a point where, like, this is, you know, it's my work, it's everything. And yeah, so
yeah,
it's
and for
one of the many journeys.
For people who maybe have been in a place where that didn't feel safe, or they didn't have modeling for it. I think for myself, growing up kind of in the Midwest, and I was pretty fortunate. My parents were very progressive for like Midwestern kind of mentality, in that they, you know, got massages regularly and they sought counseling and things. But my mom would meditate a little bit, you know, things like this. But I didn't really have modeling for like emotional release, if that makes sense. That there wasn't space for that in my family growing up. And so I had to find that in other practices. And yoga, for me, I found yoga when I was 16, and I'm 40 now. And there were so many times when the only time I could cry was in child's pose during a yoga class. It was like the only time that my body felt safe to really release, you know, in that like fetal position with the earth and feeling held by the earth, and just allowing the emotions to flow and release from my body, because we're living in such a fast-paced world you know, and we're living this like technology. So many things are like visually stimulating, keeping us stimulated. And definitely yoga and mantras are such an amazing way to just turn that vision inside. And how do we, you know, kind of activating the third eye, if that resonates with people, and like turning that vision inside and really, you know, maybe doing body scans or breathing and really starting to see like what is going on in
Yeah,
my internal reality,
exactly.
you
Something
know?
that's been really working for me lately, it was when I was kind of struggling with my meditation practice during quarantine. And I was like sitting there, I was like, ah. And I was like, you know what? I just need to like, I talked to a friend. She's like, just sit at your altar and like, let whatever flow, flow. And I'm like, that's like exactly, like, it's more feminine. It's like more like the non-linear. And I was needing that because I run a business and it's like all these things. And my like default is a more like kind of edgy. God, I'm like, because I just like, I've done everything myself for so long. I feel very feminine, but I definitely have a strong masculine in how I approach the functionality of my work at times. And so
Yes.
just sitting at my altar and just being like, I'm just gonna let it flow was such a gift. And that included the breathing and the body scanning. And then I got a drum because I was feeling called to a drum, and I finally got one. And then I just started chanting, and I would chant for as long as I wanted to, depending on, you know, how much time I had that morning. And so the drum itself was just this like resonance moving through my body. It connected me. I'm European Jewish on my dad's side and Cherokee, Choctaw, and French on my mom's side. So it kind of connected me to my mom and my native roots and even my Jewish roots, and like all of these chant. And I'm not like, I don't know the
Yes.
songs. I wasn't learning a song. I just let it flow. And so
Flow.
activating the throat, I think for anyone, but especially women, especially sensitive women who carry a lot of power, who are learning to reclaim their power, like perhaps it's because of past life stuff that we feel stuck here, whatever it is. And so just chanting. And I feel like, and when I was little, I used to make up my own languages. So it was almost like appealing to my inner
Yes.
child. And these like
Yes.
ancient, like made up languages that
Yes.
felt like ancient native, ancient Jewish, and like fantasy world. I don't even know. And I was just like doing
Yes.
it, and then I would sit in meditation afterwards, and it was a whole different experience. And so yes, to have the regimented thing, you know, I've been a yogi for so long, like it's like very structured, but I mean, I love yoga and it saved my life more times than I can count. So do yoga, but it's also, you know, it's been passed down by men primarily in India. So, and perhaps it existed before then, and there's histories that we aren't dialed into yet. Who knows? But it's like just to kind of let go of the structure and the alignment as I learned it to be, and just be like, well, what's another way of aligning, and what's another way of connecting to the elements and to this energy of flow, and what's present in this moment, and not trying to shape it into like put it into a certain shape has been like also very helpful. And then if I lean too far in that way, then I'm like, okay, now I'm like need to kind of come back and like commit again to the structure. And so it's just that, again, it's the internal external dance, the dance of the moon cycles, noticing which comes easier to us, which one we're more comfortable in, and like going into the one that we're less comfortable in, and strengthening that knowledge and that muscle and that side. You know, if we have a full wingspan, like strengthening that other wing as well.
Yeah, I love that. When I went to Maharishi for a while, Maharishi University of Management, and it was very regimented. And one of the things that Maharishi would say was that you need a structure so that then you can go deeper in your meditation. And so sometimes that can be really helpful if you're really in like a healing crisis situation.
Absolutely.
To have a daily routine. This is what I'm going to do every day. And yeah, you know, in circumstances, obviously you can deviate from it, but it can really help to ground your energy. And then you find that you can go so much more deeper into the creative because you have kind of like that chrysalis, like you have that container, that structure, so you can turn into goo. you
Yeah.
know?
Oh yeah. And that structure has saved my life. It's like with my divorce, I was like everyday non-negotiable meditation. Like there's been times where I needed that or I would have sunk, you know? And I think maybe because I'm
Yeah.
17, I'm like in my place and I'm like, I'm working and everything's
You,
happening here, that I had to like, you know, so
yeah, because you're just like feeling the four walls.
yeah, I'm like, no. Yeah. So like,
I just have to share that. I love that you shared about speaking this ancient kind of channeled language, because I had my best friend passed away when I was 18, and I remember like going to his grave and like I didn't know what to say to him.
mm,
And I just started like walking around his grave, and like they didn't for there was a lot of weird family stuff for him, so there was no headstone. We just like knew it was by this tree, and I would like go and decorate the tree, and I would try to like with flowers and stuff like hang daisies from all over the tree, or like wrap it in ribbon, or like try to bring my love to him. But when I really felt connected, I would walk and I would just start, like you're saying, I would just start talking in this other language. And it really helped for me to like tell him what I was really feeling, because English was it was too formed, if that makes sense. Like it couldn't contain the emotions that I was feeling. And so I know like in Christianity, sometimes they say like you speak in tongues or something,
I
right?
used to
And
think I
so
could do that when I was little. I don't know if I was, but I believed I could. And I was not Christian at all, but I just was like, I'm going to speak tongues.
no, but I think that's another really healing thing, is to just allow your body and your soul to just make sounds that feel like the resonance of what you're feeling.
Yeah.
And to not have to have the cognitive linear mind be like, what are you doing? You know,
It's so
but to
healing for the throat and the throat chakra and the voice and like, I feel like there's so much more going on here than we might realize. And then it also, yeah, it just like kind of helped get me out of the head and into the body. So
yes. And, you know, would you share with us maybe one of the things or some of the things that you find like challenging about healing, like some of the blocks, so that maybe, you know, people who are listening in the community could help like identify maybe one of those, or like what, yeah, I don't
yeah.
know if if you've experienced that at all.
Do you mean like, well, I'll just flow, I guess. Do you mean most challenging for me personally, like incidences that have been most challenging, or just like the blocks that come up?
I was thinking more like the blocks that come up, you
Yeah.
know?
I think resistance is a lot for people, you know, whether that's resistance to sitting and meditating, or resistance to move. As much as I've taught and as long as I've taught movement, I actually go through phases where I'm like so resistant to it, but I have a very strong mind. I just had a conversation with a friend about this yesterday. And so like dance to me is so, it's like being in the body is
Yes.
where I thrive. Spontaneity is where I thrive. That's why I've traveled the world. And that's been one of my healing things, by the way, as well, as travel and just immersing myself in different environments. I've worked with a lot of medicine people and like all kinds of stuff. So, and with all of that, there's probably because I had to learn control growing up on some level that manifested in very weird ways in my teen years. And so I think for me, and I'm sure some people relate to this, is like resistance of really being in the body, and moving out of obsessive looping thinking, which of course being in the body can really help with that. So resistance, I think, you know, letting go like can be a really big challenge, like letting go of being upset with someone or how you were raised, or like not able to be in acceptance and forgiveness. Again, this is like a main theme for me. I'm still ironing out some of that because I've had new realizations, or like new parts of me have come up where I know it was connected to, you know, my upbringing or a circumstance in my life. And so I do my best to try to have the conversations I'd like to have, but sometimes it can only go so far. So my work right now is like accepting people for where they're at and how they process and
Yeah.
operate, and not judging them, because I'm really just like an extension of how I'm judging myself when I do that, or I'm just throwing back the very thing that was like hurting me. So just like noticing those nuances of how we speak to ourselves, the inner dialogue, how we're seeing and projecting that out onto others, because those are all clues. and and then just acknowledging the resistance that can come up, um, and the letting go and the releasing of judgment is hard. I think that's a challenge, but I think it's something that needs to happen. And I think oftentimes the resistance that's showing up is the like gold, is the diamond, is the like the wealth that you're calling in,
Yes.
whether that's financially or in your healing or in partnership or love. It's like where we're feeling that, oh, that fear of intimacy or that fear of going deeper, which I think all of this is a layer of intimacy with ourselves, with others, being really honest about what we want, being really honest about, you know, what's blocking us, how we're blocking ourselves, even if it's an outside story. I think that's challenging, is the resistance,
Mm-hmm.
the practice of letting go and forgiving and acceptance. And no one can give it to us but us. Like we might finally get the validation we've been craving, or the acceptance, or being seen. It can help. It could be a nice dose of medicine. It can be uplifting. But if we're not doing that deeper stuff within ourselves, even if it was an external force that brought it on, like we are the only ones that can cultivate that for ourselves. It will never be enough if we keep seeking it outside of ourselves. And it sounds so cliche, but I think in practice it takes a lot of work and it's a lot of courage. Being human is very dense.
Yes. And
uh,
asking
yeah,
yourself, like, how can I give this to myself?
yeah,
What does that look like, maybe, to really be gentle with myself? I noticed with my husband, because of a lot of abandonment issues I had, when he would get angry with me, I would just like, especially having a child and having that extra responsibility. I mean, I literally felt like the world was just like crumbling, you know? And sometimes he is a very loving person, but he can get really kind of, he's like a Scorpio, right? So he really knows how to get that one little thing, you know? And it would super trigger me, like really, really trigger me. And I finally was able to notice the trigger enough times that now if he's going into that, I can really be with myself and be there for myself and just be like, that's what he's experiencing of you right now. That doesn't mean that that's reality. Just because
yeah,
one person is experiencing you in this way does not make it so that
that you're not
that
lovable
is
or
your,
something.
yeah,
I know it's
right.
crazy how those experiences can trigger, especially if we grew up with trauma, like can just trigger like this panic, or this like suddenly like just solidifying all the beliefs we had about ourselves and like one.
Yeah.
And that's where I think like, yeah. And I think it sounds like you've done like
And
baby steps towards it, and it's finally coming to a place where you're like, oh, finally, like I can breathe in this, and really like acknowledging those little steps for ourselves is so important. Being like noticing our progress. If someone who's
yeah.
listening to this is really used to being hard on themselves, which I've had like a very, very harsh inner critic over the years, like that even has to like, just like giving myself credit and notice, like taking a moment to take in the wins, even if they're teeny tiny. And then that just also like helps us get into the softer, more feminine space, a little more soft and surrendered in our being. And just, yeah, being like teachable and curious through the ups and downs. Like, I think if we choose to learn from our experiences, that we really, it's not a mistake. Like if we can really learn from it, I don't feel like there's any mistakes. Like we're all in this human life to learn. It's like we're meant to learn the emotional landscape of being a human. We're meant to learn about our limitations, our ability to expand beyond those limitations. And that's like what this school is about. So I think if we can like kind of
Yeah.
remember that, and then get the outside support because we need those reminders. We need that soundboard. We need sometimes those
Mm-hmm.
reflections to remember we're not totally crazy, or that like someone who where we can feel as big as we need to, and they're like able to hold that. And there's special people for that. And that alone, to be held in the like abyss of feeling something so deep and sometimes scary, I think can be healing, to be witnessed in that way by someone who has kind of an objective compassion.
Yes. And in that kind of womb space, allowing, what's coming to me is like, in that space of healing, that feels very much like womby to me, nurturing womb held, and allowing ourselves to like fully be rebirthed through the experience that we're having, and being like, I don't actually need to come out of this experience and be who I was to be okay. I can figure out how to like walk through life in this new way. I don't have to take all of that with me, if that makes sense. Like,
Yeah.
I think sometimes we can so identify with the things we've gone through in life, and it can become burdensome to like carry all of that.
About this exact thing this week, like literally, because like it's just kind of like almost like we defend. I think we have to go through that process because we like need that. It's just like, I've suffered, we have to like kind of go through that. And then at what point are we like, actually, I can enter this new relationship as the new me. Like that's allowed.
Exactly.
And like,
exactly.
I have like held on to that because I didn't personally get the validation. And it's just like, I'm standing up for all people who have suffered. It was like this like victor, this like justice seeker comes through me. That's like, I must hold this and bear the story, But recently I'm like, yeah, it'd be nice to have like, I don't have to be so dense all the time. I don't have I'm like, healing is can have a serious energy to it sometimes, but play and joy and like being lighter is also a part of the healing. Like, yes, there's that deep excavation of the shadow work, but it's not the whole picture and it's not the whole truth. And so it's like, how do we see the full spectrum of truth? And what I say to the people that my students and the people that work with me, especially in the moon deck trainings I do, it's an intuitive oracle training, is like when someone says, well, I really struggle with loving myself, or I really I don't trust myself. I was like, okay, this might be true. So I'll give that to you. There's probably some truth there, which said on repeat becomes a mantra in and of itself. So you have to be careful of that. But what's also true is this whole spectrum. And what over here is, yes, you might not love yourself the way you'd like. You might not trust yourself. You doubt yourself, etc. Fine, that's true. I'll give that to you. And what's also true is I'm learning how to trust myself. I'm learning how to love myself more deeply. It's this spark of self-love.
And I'm open.
It's teeny, tiny spark of self-love. That little teeny spark is what got you to sign up for this program in the first place. So you do love yourself. It just, we need, sure, there's work to do, but this isn't, the fact that you don't do it isn't the whole truth. What's also true is that you're learning to do it. And it's a very different vibration when we say it that way. And when just even the internal acknowledgement of like, okay, I'm learning. I'm not there yet, but I'm learning.
And I'm thinking, because the butterfly has been coming right in this talk, but it's almost like the butterfly then being attached to still being a caterpillar, if that makes sense. And that at some point you're like, you know what? I went through the chrysalis phase. I metamorphosized. I gooed up. And now I can remember being a caterpillar, but I don't have to stay wounded. I don't have to stay in that energy.
Yeah.
I can transform it. I can fully transmute my situation. And now I can actually be victorious through this situation that I've encountered. I can actually take this wisdom and this gift, because we know that when we go through that transformation, there's always some kind of deeper, I'm thinking of when I lost this friend of mine, which was soul shattering, because he was really the only person I ever felt who really saw me, who saw my soul and saw my spirit. And the thing that was interesting was it opened me up to the spirit realm, and being able to really hear spiritual guidance at a deeper level, because I knew someone who had crossed over and I could communicate with him. And so even though it was this heart-wrenching thing, it gave me this incredible gift. And so kind of like mining for it, like allowing yourself to go through all of that, and then keeping this question, like, what could this be forming my spirit or soul into? Like, what could I take from this experience and actually allow it to make me stronger or more of who I am, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and then create with it, whether that's like you said, being creative was helpful for you. And I think when we do that deep work, we're doing much bigger work, I believe. I don't know for sure because I'm still in human form, but like I think we're doing like much, much bigger work on a soul level, like for our lineage and our great grandmothers and our mother, and like, and whatever comes next, whether we have children or not, we're still leaving an essence behind. We're still leaving some legacy behind, whether it's through energetics or in some other way. And so I feel like doing that work is profound and really can be fertilizer for the planet in so many different ways. But I think that the trick is in the self-help world that we just know when it's time to get back in the world and not get so stuck in the rabbit hole of this perpetual self-fixing situation, because that's like probably a whole nother conversation. But I think that's like important to also be aware of, like how, like sometimes you don't need to dig any deeper. It's like you went enough, it's fine. You don't need like every single detail, like and sometimes you do in certain situations, but just to be really honest with ourselves of like, how deep do you really need to dig in this thing to get what you need out of it? How far down the rabbit hole do you really need to go? Is this assisting you? Is this helping you show up? Is this bringing you back into alignment, into your service, into your dharma, into, you know, are you learning to be close to people through this work? Whatever it is, going to look really different. But just in the self-help world, I think that is like maybe the danger of like how to not get so stuck in that place that we're not really in the world with it, or not enjoying this precious brief life that we have.
Totally. I was just thinking, like, and I'm sorry if this is starting to become too redundant, but like that's like the butterfly being like, what's wrong with me? I'm not a caterpillar anymore, you know, instead of just being like, you are a freaking butterfly now. Like you, like allowing everything to have its time, just like the cycles of the moon, right? Like it's always moving through those cycles. And I think for me, that's been such a key part to healing. And if you feel stuck, like find another technique, find another something to do. Like with me too.
Disrupting of the pattern.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And like, if you're like, you know what, I feel like I'm waking up every morning. This is a good indicator. If you wake up every morning and you feel the same, something needs to shift, because you should be feeling different. I'm not saying every morning you wake up feeling amazing, but like you should be feeling different. It shouldn't be this feeling of like Groundhog's Day, you know, because that is a sign that there's something is kind of, there's a log jam going on or something, and you need that pattern interrupt, you know, just to really shake things up and get a new perspective, you know. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Lea, this has been just so delightful to speak with you and insightful. And I feel so blessed that you shared this time with us and really shared your intimate self with us. And it's such a gift. And I would love to just take a couple breaths together just to kind of integrate and send this off as a prayer to whoever is open to receiving it.
Can I pick one card real quick? And
yes. Yes.
Maybe we'll end up getting the butterfly. So that would be
or
awesome.
whatever we need.
We need. I never, the moon deck always knows. I swear it seems to always be on point.
Yes, I'm going to be getting mine soon.
Oh, good. Ooh, we got the raven.
Oh, another flying one.
And it says, I trust the mystery of life.
I love this. I love
Come
this.
on, focus. There it is. I trust
There.
the mystery of life.
Of life. So true, right? And in our conversation, like just trusting that process, trusting.
Yeah, like the deep wisdom that's underneath, like the doors that close, the doors that open, the detours, because it's scary sometimes. Like things are changing, especially in the world, but just like that there is this deeper mystery in it. And the raven is the messenger between the mystical and the earth realm, between death and birth or rebirth, however that is. And yeah, I love raven medicine. So pay attention. You might
Yeah.
start to hear some of them around your neighborhood now that we got this covered.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So let's breathe into this mystery, this great mystery of life. And I'd like to end by just saying, may all beings everywhere be happy and free. And may our thoughts, words, and actions contribute to the happiness and freedom of all beings everywhere. Thank you. Many blessings to you.
Thank you for having me, Maggie. I appreciate it.